No one at the Magic Academy likes assassins, especially ones from commoner backgrounds. So the moment Van Kruger enrolls, a senior student, a magic swordswoman, decides to put him in his place. Van's just walking down the hallway with his friend, minding his own business, not even paying her any attention. So she makes sure he does. In an instant, she presses her sword against his throat and demands that he show respect, bow to her like the commoner he is. But Van doesn't even flinch. He calmly tells her that everyone here is a student, and that makes them equals. Then, he grabs her sword with his bare hand, and holds it so tightly, she can't move it at all. Shocked, she struggles with everything she's got, trying to pull it free. But Van, he just snaps the blade in half. The shards scatter across the hallway, and just like that, the entire atmosphere changes. Now she realizes it, she messed up. Big time. She picked the wrong person. So who is Van Kruger, and why is he this strong from the moment he steps into the academy? In this world, powerful people with magic exploit those without it, mocking them as the Garuda. The Mage Kingdom calls it order, but it's just racism on steroids. It gets so bad that the second prince starts plotting to kill his own brother, Heinz, and wipe out every magicless human. Then an assassin shows up. Van is someone with no powers or magic. He is someone who was born when you mix John Wick's deadly assassin skills with Gojo Satoru's looks. The assassin faces one of their strongest knights and drops him instantly with a single palm strike to the nose, destroying his victim's brain. Another mage steps in, but despite his high rank, it proves useless in front of the assassin. Van takes him out just as easily, breaking his jaw and leaving him unable to even form a spell. When the prince starts talking about treating the Garuda like livestock, Van doesn't argue with the pipsqueak, murdering him in cold blood. After that, he reports back to Heinz, his closest ally in all of this. They've spent 10 years fighting for this cause, pushing toward a world where the magicless aren't treated like low-tier trash. And now, with Heinz ready to take the throne, it finally feels possible. Fulfilled with his mission, Van goes home, back to his village, hoping to find his mother and sister, the ones he still remembers through the amulet they gave him. But when he gets there, something goes terribly wrong. The entire village is up in flames. Bodies are scattered across the ground, torn apart and left where they fell. Van tells himself it was bandits, but no matter where he looks, he cannot find his family. Everything he did, every fight he took was for them, to give them a better life. Then he finally sees her. His mother hangs from a tree showing no signs of life. The world around him stops, but before he can even process it, a voice calls out. It's his sister Rena, covered in blood, struggling to keep up. She tells him to run as bad people are coming for him. Suddenly, a blade pierces through him from behind. The soldiers laugh, thinking it is finally over. They've killed the greatest threat. But even with that gash, Van does not let his cortisol spike up. Be like Van. In his anger, he asks the only thing that he cares about. Just who is behind all of this? The answer does not make sense. It's Heinz, the same best friend who he helped succeed to the throne. Then Heinz steps forward himself, and without any shame, starts blaming Van for everything. He says people like him can kill mages without being noticed, making their very existence a threat. That's why he intends to eliminate Van and the rest of the Garuda to protect the kingdom. With his best friend crossing him on their lifelong mission, Van refuses to die and swears he will kill Heinz, even if it costs him everything. He targets only him, pushing his body into one final technique of the secret assassin arts. Heinz responds with a spear of magic, resulting in our boy getting the Toji treatment with his chest pierced. But in the end, Van's injuries result in his loss, with his best friend criticizing him for his compassionate nature. Heinz leaves him to die on his own, and with the final few seconds of his life, a creature hovers around him. The beast offers him one last chance, so when our boy opens his eyes again, he is not on the battlefield. He is back home, and Rena stands in front of him, alive and smiling, even congratulating him for turning 15. That is when reality hits him. The assassin has regressed 10 years into the past. Van thinks it was all just a sick dream, but the world feels far too real, and he can clearly remember his past along with the martial arts he mastered. Elsewhere, a young mage sets out to hunt a heretic, while the knights accompanying her openly mock the people of the Garuda district, calling them livestock without a second thought. Meanwhile, Van tries to make sense of his second chance, questioning what he should do next. At 15, every Garuda boy must choose his path. He can stay and take a low-tier job, leave town for labor, or become a mercenary, since magicless people possess overwhelming physical strength, much like Toji. Mercenaries earn well as scouts, but his mother strongly opposes that path. In his previous life, that very choice is what led him to meet Heinz. Van suddenly remembers something important and urgently begs his family to leave town for a while. He runs off to find the Purifiers, an extremist group branded as heretics. One of their core beliefs is that the Garuda are children of the devil and must be wiped out, and on this day, these bastards carried out a massacre in the name of purification. This time, he doesn't want to hide, so he targets his first victim. To kill a mage, the simplest method is to outplay their perception and destroy the brain or spinal cord before they can react. Van makes his move, secures the first kill, and ensures his presence is known. He swiftly maneuvers around his opponent, using their own mana-infused weapon to break through the mage's barrier. One of the mages fires off a spell, but Van closes the distance before it can land and drives a hit straight into his gut. Now, only 3 opponents remain, and just as he is about to finish them, one of them grabs a hostage and orders him to surrender, or the woman dies. Van realizes his mistake. He did not check for others nearby. Though surrender will result in death, he simply has no choice. Van throws his hands up in the air, resulting in him getting knocked down. The whole gang dogpiles on him at once, stomping him into the ground without restraint. One of them insists they should kill him immediately, convinced that the boy is death itself and that letting him live will only bring disaster upon them. Before they can act on it, a girl comes to his rescue. The mage unleashes an ice spell, freezing the fanatics in place and declaring their arrest without hesitation. Van is caught off guard because even in his previous life, reinforcements took much longer to arrive. The woman and her squad quickly secure the heretics, but her attention shifts to Van, the boy who managed to take down 3 of them on his own. Impressed, she explains that one of the men he killed had the power to engulf the entire village in flames. She had planned to deal with him carefully to avoid collateral damage, but Van eliminated him already. Helene learns his name. Clearly intrigued with the boy, she suggests that he should consider joining the Magic Academy. Many heroes and renowned mages have come from this academy, yet Van cannot understand why she is choosing him. They arrive at a quiet, isolated spot where the mage suddenly threatens to kill him. Without warning, she activates a spell and fires an ice arrow straight at Van. To her shock, he is already gone, and he did not use any technique. In an instant, he appears behind her, perfectly positioned in her blind spot and ready to strike. Just before delivering the killing blow, Van stops and calls her out on her poor acting, because she lacks the intent to kill him. The mage is impressed, recognizing that the boy already carries himself like a seasoned fighter. It surprises her that he can stand against mages using nothing but raw skill. Helene then brings up the idea that the fate of the Garuda could change entirely if Van joins the academy, hinting at the Knight Conferment system, which rewards exceptional students for their achievements. Through that system, even commoners can rise and establish a noble house, meaning this entire district could gain status through Van alone. The curious boy asks her 3 questions. First, he mentions that he would need a noble's recommendation, so Helene immediately offers to write one for him. Second, he questions how someone like him, without magic, could even belong in a magic academy. Helene admits it may sound strange, but explains that many who earned knighthood did so by discovering new principles of magic, rather than simply using it. From potion making to the study of magic circles, she explains that magic is far broader than casting spells. Everything now seems to rest on his shoulders, which leads him to his final question. What does Helene gain from helping him rise to nobility? Helene makes it clear that she has her own purpose, but she has no intention of sharing it with him. Before Van can press her further, his sister arrives, having heard that he fought off dangerous enemies. At the same time, Helene gives Van a reason to fight for them, vowing under the Steiner's family name that she will protect his loved ones if he does. Days later, Van's mother is still upset about the fighting, but the boy ends up telling them about the academy and everything he could gain from it. Rena and his mother are horrified, knowing the Magic Academy is meant for mages, but Van reassures them that he will prove they are not inferior. His old life as an assassin no longer fits this path, and he knows he cannot do this alone. Helene's offer opens a completely new road for him. Having already died once, Van no longer hesitates to take hold of even the smallest chance at hope. He declares that he will erase the discrimination the Garuda face in this country, and his words carry the same firm resolve his father once had. His mother knows how stubborn he is, so she allows him to choose his own path. There is just one problem: the tuition fees, especially in this goddamn economy. Just when it seems impossible, Helene steps in and rewards him with a bounty for his role in the mission, solving his problem. Before he leaves, his mother tells him not to let the world's cruelty turn him bitter. Van says goodbye to his family and sets out, carrying their hopes with him. In the next moment, he stands before the magnificent academy, and this is where the real story begins. The boy is taken aback, awed with the grandeur of the academy. People around him are cheerily hustling about. A candidate introduces himself as Alexis von Hohenberg of the Hohenberg family. The guard instantly bows before the noble's son. There's also a girl recommended by the Duchess of Krausenberg, another prominent noble. The boy steps up front to apply, only to get shouted at out of the blue. Noticing his red eyes, the elite kids around him recognize him as a shitty Garuda. The treatment is harsh, and it's only just the start. Keeping it chill, our boy assures the guards that he didn't cause any trouble, that he's just here to apply. But the furious guard mocks him for not even knowing where he's standing. Van fires back by emphasizing that he's here for the Royal Academy, a place where anyone can take the exam regardless of status. Overreacting to a simple comment, the guard brings a spear right up to the boy's face, refusing to allow a Garuda to take the exam. Right away, Van is just thinking about how things resulted in a mess from the get-go. He can easily take this dude down, but causing a scene in front of so many people will destroy his perception. The more sensible guard tries to stop this guy from causing a scene in front of the examinees. Van is impressed that at least someone is trying to listen to him, but bro's perception is shattered pretty fast. The same guards who treated those kids like gods are looking down on our boy with condescension, calling him a deluded idiot like all the others. Van has to get used to these shitty standards from here already. The guard emphasizes to him that the academy doesn't discriminate on anyone's background. However, in order to take the entrance exam, a recommendation from a noble is necessary. He somehow thinks the kid wouldn't have that. But Van assures him he does, stunning the man, before he pops out the letter with a proper noble's seal on it. The moment he notices the Steiner's family emblem, he roars at the kid, calling him an insolent bastard for trying to fake his way in. The guard thinks that no reasonable noble would ever recommend a magicless twat, so he takes the letter so he can accuse Van of committing a capital offense. Our boy isn't having any of it and drags his straight back, tossing him into the ground with a heavy thud. The other guy is just confused, while the rest of the candidates observe in shock. Neither of the guards can believe that a magicless boy managed to make an adult fall like that. They even call it a fluke. Suddenly, one of the examiners comes around to check on the matter, and both guards apologize for causing the commotion. They hesitantly reveal that a Garuda is trying to apply to the academy, so the examiner glances at the kid and asks who he is. Van introduces himself as a candidate recommended by Helene Steinertz herself, a name that most others seem to recognize. Inspecting the letter with his own eyes, the examiner confirms that both the seal and the signature belong to Steinertz's family. His attitude shifts and he bows before the boy, ushering him to go inside. The thing is, the Steinertz family is no joke, and all of a sudden everyone is interested in Van's identity, questioning how on earth he got the recommendation. Our boy is uncomfortable with the attention, and deduces that Helene must come from a big-shot family. Entering inside, the boy looks around, noticing that each and every one of these people is an elite. He catches a glimpse of Dietrich, who later becomes the valiant swordsman. Aside from him, there's also Shale, the Grand Mage of Flames, and Lunaris, a blonde girl who becomes the Maiden of Might later on. Every single one of these significant figures from his previous life seem to have graduated from the academy. Looking back at it now, Van was just a cold-blooded assassin, one who couldn't share the light of the heroes that fought for the kingdom on the battlefield. However, the moment the throne came into a power struggle, each of them ended up working for the corrupt princes. In the end, this man had to kill all of them. Talk about aura farming to the max. Bro's basically looking at his body count victims. Still, now that he's at the academy, he has to compete with them under the light. And though it's going to be tough, Van intends to struggle hard and change the kingdom for good. While he's out here having his epic protagonist monologue, a dude calls out to him and talks down on him for standing calmly. Confused, Van expresses that he can choose to stand wherever he wants. And hilariously, this guy thinks it's our boy who's being rude. He goes on to give a 5-page essay of what family he belongs to, but Van has gotten so used to this in his previous life that he thinks bowing his head might be the easy thing to do. He remembers his mother's sweet words not to let the world pollute his mindset. Even in his previous life, Heinz told him the same thing, that bowing down to the people who hate you will never earn you equality. The person urged his friend to carry himself with dignity, but the kid yapping to him right now is an impulsive brat who forces his hands on Van. No more Mr. Nice Guy. Van tells him that he's the one who started this confrontation, and before the little bro could understand what he means, he grabs both his arms, forcing the kid down to his knees. This is called Spelveg, the ability to resist the opponent's strength while harmonizing one's own, manipulating the other person's movements. That's actually the same technique he applied against the guard too. Now that the noble is posted on his knees like a good boy, Van offers him a hand, further humiliating him. Apparently the kid is so stubborn that he casts a magic spell right then and there to attack, only for one person's voice to stop the fight. Everyone freezes with the arrival of Prince Heinz, who highlights that the Garuda are the allies of the kingdom. The kid apologizes to the prince while Heinz is so humble he considers himself as just an examinee like all the others, requesting to be treated normally. He extends this same invitation to Van, but our boy is far too busy processing the fact that this guy too happens to be an academy graduate in the future. The ninth prince's appearance stuns the students. They didn't expect him to take an exam just like the rest of them, and what bugs them more is how he's being nice to a Garuda, cementing him with an even greater status. As for our boy, he's remembering their previous conversations, how Heinz once mentioned that he was at an academy studying long ago. That conversation rings true now. The current prince thinks that he might have intimidated the boy, and expresses how he too feels nervous because the entrance criteria for this exam is known to be difficult. Offering a hand, Heinz assures him that there's no need to be intimidated, they should all just do their best. Van watches his smile with skepticism. He knows that the prince lures everyone in with that charismatic smile, but he now knows this guy's true nature, that he's actually plotting something behind that warm smile. The thought even crosses Van's mind to kill the prince right here, but his future will be jeopardized in the process. Despite his harsh feelings towards the monster who killed his family, Van chooses to control his emotions. Watching his disgusted expression confuses Heinz, making him wonder what's wrong. But our boy wastes no time with the guy and walks away, refusing to have any interest in making friends. He leaves the prince with a desolate expression, the bitter acceptance of loneliness. Even the elite candidates remain baffled, forming the opinion that magicless people are animals. A man loudly roars, "Silence!" It's the examiner, who is here to announce the end of the registration process for the examinees. Next, they're going to be escorted to the examination site, a place hailed as the Forest of Shadows. The name appears intriguing to Van, and in the next scene, we catch all of the examiners standing near the location. The supervisor addresses them, welcoming them to the forest, which will also be used as a testing ground for the year exam. Like they're already aware, the Academy is known for raising elite students who can further the kingdom's future, which means they don't want talentless beginners. The first test will be conducted based around a candidate's baseline magic proficiency. Also, the First of Shadows is known to be a land drenched in mana, and in the deeper area, a flower blooms. The task of the examinees is to collect 10 of these flowers. Opposing their goal are the hungry monsters dwelling in the forest who also have mana, which means it's not going to be easy. Now, our boy was expecting the test to be difficult, but he had no idea they were going to be fighting beasts right off the bat. Another rule is that any kind of interruption is forbidden, but team play or parties are allowed for this exam. At the same time, passing would require each individual person to complete 10 flowers each. According to the supervisor, forming large groups might actually end up being a disadvantage. The time limit to achieve the goal is until sundown. Finally, the examiner steps in and explains that each candidate will be given a badge, and upon crushing it, it will signal an examiner to come rescue them. However, popping the badge will also result in immediate disqualification. The exam begins at once. They're told to enter the forest and complete the task right away. Some of the performative elites are out here forming relationships, while other guys are just reuniting with their old friends, leaving our boy all alone with no one to team up with. But that's a good thing. Van wants to be alone in the first place. He steps up to collect the badge, but the supervisor looks at him with intensity. He hands the kid his badge, letting Van step into the forest. There's also a kid tailing behind him. Anyway, Van isn't a pussy and wants all the smoke right off the bat, so he confronts a beast with a mid-sized magic capacity. In simple terms, animals with mana are called magic beasts. Their physical abilities are far more powerful than a human's, and dealing with them is often more troublesome than a human. The creature charges at our boy, who remembers that ever since he became an assassin, he found his main targets to be humans, which means he hasn't faced a beast in a very long time. As for the creature pouncing at him right now, I can't believe I have to say this, but the assassin straight up punches him like a warrior, all thanks to the magic beast-slaying arts he also conveniently knows. This reminds me of the Sukuna Hine-era memes to invent techniques on the spot. Anyway, this move focuses a person's momentum in a single forced strike. Just the sheer impact generated from it penetrates any creature's body. Normally it's hard to land, but for magic beasts who act on impulse, it's the safest move to one-shot them with. The beast is slain, toppling before the boy, while Van remembers how even when he was an assassin, he'd have to confront magic beasts and learn how to take them down that way. By the way, he also knows that his stalker is watching him, but he pretends not to care and simply moves on. It's actually revealed to be two punks, who can't believe that a kid like that exists. Refusing to believe that he took the creature down with raw strength, they theorize that he must have used poison, a cheap tactic that won't work against them. At the same time, his friend reminds him that interfering with other applicants is forbidden. But in truth, the examinees think that it's just a bluff, because no one really wants to see a Garuda passing the exam. Not just that, Van insulted the prince, so this brat believes that killing him will never pin the blame on him. Bro's got the justification of light Yagami with the IQ of Yamcha. By the way, in the next scene, we find the supervisor escorted to a giant cell. The man demands the key, while the guards question if what he's about to do is really okay. Assuring them that the beast is controlled by magic, the scumbag intends to set its target to rip apart the boy who snuck in the entrance exam. They all want to kill the Garuda kid. After all, turning away candidates with a recommendation is impossible for them. But if a Garuda clears the exam, it will destroy their academy's honor. Justifying that Garuda will always meet a shitty fate, the man intends to go along with his actions. Even then, the guard reasons that the other candidates could possibly land in danger because of the beast. However, the supervisor thinks it's fine because Van is spotted on his own, which means no candidate should go near him anyway. With the key, he pops open the gate, hollering at the beast to go and kill the filthy Garuda to defend their academy's legacy. The scene cuts to the examiner with the purple hair, the one who senses that there's something wrong about this year's exam. The supervisor returns back to him, asking for any odd updates, while the examiner reports that things are chill right now. He asks where this guy has gone, while the dude casually remarks that he was just making preparations. His malicious expression is something that the younger guy notices at once, sensing something's wrong. Back to Van, our boy finds his way to the deeper forest, locating flowers matching the description he was given. They're the gorgeous Heaven's Tear flowers. All he has to do is pick one and return. But before he can do that, he urges the stalkers to just come out already. The two punks are surprised that he's kept track of their movement so far, mocking Van for having a dog-like nose. Refusing to fall for the rage bait attempt, our boy responds that he's just used to cowards attacking from behind. Hilariously, Bro realizes that he can't even say something like that since he's an assassin who uses the same tactic. Both punks taunt him for not having a place at the academy, which they will prove by their own accord. Van calls them out on their bullshit logic, and expresses that the real reason is because they want revenge for their shitty pride. Gesturing into a stance, my goat assures them he will knock that pride straight out of these brats. Pissed off, both kids formulate a spell each, preparing to attack him. Identifying the threat, Van notices that one of them is a mage and the other a magic swordsman. He wonders how he should deal with them, as combat styles are typically divided into 3 main types. The first one is the most common, spell-casting mages, and the second type involves imbuing weapons with mana. They're called blade mages. Finally, the third type has bodily enhancement. They're labeled as the mana fists. 2 different styles working in one team is usually considered effective, as it balances weaknesses of each. Reading the expression of one of the kids, Van senses that they might not have any killing experience. However, they're still out for his head, even though Van doesn't want to kill these guys. The thing is, if someone like a Garuda dies, no one will give a damn and the academy will mask it as some kind of accident. But if a noble's child dies, their house will gather all its might to track the killer, possibly threatening the whole of Garuda distinctly as revenge. The nobles of this country are a pain in the ass to deal with. They got their lands through waging war, so they're open to taking fights. However, our boy doesn't want to follow that path this time, as he intends to remain in the light. That's why he won't be using any deadly techniques in the fight, and instead opt to crush their very spirit, forcing them to surrender. His determined look annoys the punks, especially Bullcut Hay, who casts his mighty Zerwinda spell to send ripples of wind against our boy. Though Van is able to evade the attack, he still gets slightly cut. The kid praises him for being sharp because he had just used a fatal strike. Our boy doesn't have much to comment on the wind slash, while the noble is out here giving him another 12-page essay on his family's special invisible blade technique. In other words, it's kinda like Sukuna's cleave and dismantle, as you can't see those attacks. The kid assumes his victory, practically demanding the Garuda to get on his knees and beg, but Van calls it a pretty lame summer spell. He wonders if House Valtryke specializes in delivering breezes, which I have to say, is a career-ending burn. Bro cut this guy harder than his own spell, provoking him to use a greater technique called the Zerwinda Tempest. Now this attack has greater range and rips apart the forest, but Van is fast on his feet, managing to evade the invisible slashes. It's not like Van can see the technique. Nah, he's just extremely fast on picking up a person's killing intent and responding accordingly. Making contact with his target, Van smashes a heavy gut punch, giving this dude a reality check for days. With him put to sleep, the other kid, a magic swordsman, tries to act like a big shot. He charges towards his opponent. Van immediately looks at his hand and senses the kind of fighter he is, because as long as he avoids the sword, it's just like any other weapon. Except, this isn't exactly the easiest thing to do either, because the tip of the weapon alone moves several times faster than a regular punch. However, our boy's got those lightning-fast reflexes, being able to dash in and grab his opponent's hand, instead of grappling with the sword itself. Next, he intelligently redirects the arm, swaying the kid, before delivering a lethal karate chop to knock him down. The second kid gets back up. Van dares him to come and try once more, because if he does, he'll stop holding back. The kid wants to throw up hands to surrender, begging for the fight not to continue. Suddenly, our boy senses a powerful presence nearby. His instincts are telling him that things aren't how they should be, and showing concern for the others, he begs them to get the hell out fast. In front of him arrives a creature drenched in red, a monster so menacing that it stops them dead in their tracks. With just a single strike, it launches all 3 of them up in the air, causing them to crash down. Van processes what the hell just happened. His face expresses horror at the incoming hellboar, a menacing, high-ranking monster that shouldn't even be in this forest. The boar is about to smash them once again. Hellboars are generally known as the Cursed Fangs. They have mana-charged lunges, about as powerful as siege magic. In other words, a few hits and you're dead. Van knows this is a dangerous battle and tells the other 2 to run off. One of them accepts his suggestion, but Curly Hair refuses to run, surprising our boy. And no, it's not because this dude is brave or anything. He just got his foot shattered because of the charge, so he can't even stand. Van is far too busy focusing on the injured boy than on the monster literally charging in his face. Things have become confusing, because he doesn't even have the choice to run while carrying the boy, as the hellboar will catch up to them, especially since they have a habit of pursuing marked prey. The second option is to smash the badge and call for an examiner, but then, reinforcements will take time to arrive too. The boy with the bad leg believes he's no good to continue, insisting his friend go. Maintaining his pride until the very end as one of the Valtryke family, the kid wants to handle this on his own. However, his friend refuses to abandon his comrade, and believes that doing so will only disgrace his own noble house. While the Nepo babies are fighting for brotherhood, Van is weirded out. Still, he tells them to crush the badge in the meantime. He'll keep the hellboar busy. One of the kids doesn't want to fail and let the blame be shifted to his family. Actually, both punks believe that way, and instead of going down, they want to die on their feet, fighting with their magic. Yep, the dumbasses and their cheap Vegeta-level pride is bumming Van out. He shouts at them that if they're really in it to fight, then they gotta fight this battle to actually win, as that would signify a noble's true honor. Instead of understanding his position, they continue to call him a Garuda. Anyway, the hellboar is surely taking his sweet-ass time for letting them talk for so long, but we're finally back to the monster inches away from tackling them. The supervisor is chilling, knowing that it's finally time for the main event. Curious about his words, the examiner asks what he's on about. The ugly uncle refuses to elaborate and changes topics by asking if anyone called for help yet. But there haven't been any signs. Things have been quiet as of late. This makes this guy even more happy, because he believes the Garuda got squashed so bad he couldn't even call for help. The thing about the examinees is that they all had their belongings zapped at the start of the test. All this guy had to do was go and fetch Van's backpack before showing it in front of the Hellboar, allowing the magical beast to target that same scent. Having given such an easy start, he thinks it's game over for the kid, and that only the report is left to confirm the boy's death. Bro is quietly chuckling, thinking he is out here manipulating like Ayanokoji or some shit, while the examiner is questioning what the fudge this guy is on about. Back to the fight against the Hellboar. The dominating high-level beast is still somehow far from its target. All three fighters are ready to stop it, with Van strategizing their approach. He's gonna lead the first attack so the others can capitalize on it. But the prideful Nepo babies don't want to listen to his orders. Well, they're gonna have to listen fast because the Hellboar is about to engage its attack. Noticing a moment to strike, Van takes off with speed, pinpointing his target's weak spot, and using a collapse strike to cause the creature to stagger. It's such a heavy hit that it impresses the others. Retribution is a technique that locates a point that is supposed to create an enemy's follow-up attack. In other words, if a quadruple creature like the Hellboar moves, it usually moves its head first. Van utilized that factor and created a penetrating strike in that moment. At the same time, his attack isn't successful, not enough to kill the magic beast. Even though he has the same martial arts skills, the 10 years of the physique and endurance he built is no longer the same, which means it's harder for him to defeat high-level monsters in a single hit. Instead, he tells his comrades to attack at once, causing the Wind Noble to unleash more of his cutter strikes. The same goes for the other one, who uses his magic sword to try and slash the creature's hide. However, his sword can't even penetrate. It's like hitting a rocky wall. All of their attacks are useless, and only end up infuriating the magic beast. Sensing what's next, Van orders everyone to get down, because this fat meat stick is charging full speed to bulldoze everything in its direction. Luckily, our boy survived the attack. Neither of them got directly hit, not even the noble brats. Van is just happy to see them alive, though one of the nobles remarks that he managed to divert the direction of the Hellboar using wind magic. That's the only reason they avoided a fatal strike. Unfortunately, the magic swordsman is completely useless, but Van doesn't want them to give up, believing they should try one more time. It seems like a death wish at first, but our boy assures them that in the next hit, he's gonna send this fat boar straight to hell. The Valtryke noble thinks he's gone crazy because they literally couldn't even tear the monster's magic protection in the first place. Giving him actionable advice, Van instructs him to use stones to increase the lethal power of the same technique. Slashing would always work, but stabbing might, focusing on a single point. Following his advice, he asks Van what's on his mind, because from the current looks of things, it's clear that they can't defeat the creature, not even with all three combined attacks. The noble thinks it's more fitting to use him as bait. That's why Van is insisting on trying again, so he can plot his own escape. It's obvious that the kid with the bad leg should be left behind, but our king is on some marvelous aura. He doesn't believe in petty revenge. The boy states that his real goal is for his family as well as the Garuda people to be recognized as equals in the kingdom. In order to pursue such a goal, he can't allow himself to abandon his comrades and run off. Watching him say those words and stand to support him reminds the crappy noble of how he treated this guy all this time, disgusting himself with his own behavior. Back to our precious Hellboar. This thing's coming right back for round 3. Van roars for them to launch another attack. The Hellboar advances to hit them at full velocity. The Wind Noble activates Blade Dance, opening up his winds to deploy fragments. This attack is called the Black Dust Sky Rend, which collects debris and launches it at the magic beast. The high-level beast is clearly receiving damage. It can't keep up with the attacks, allowing our boy to step right in and use this opening. Van jumps at the beast, aiming right for its head and grabbing it. Different from humans, quadruple beasts typically don't have a connected shoulder blade with their spines. This way, they access immense flexibility and movement in their front legs, but also creates a weakness against unexpected force. Van deploys the usage of his Gookie Combined Technique number 10, smashing the monster into the ground. Next, he orders the magic swordsman to quickly pierce it, to attack the heart located just at the base. The kid with the magic sword is about to have his glorious moment. He hesitates at the sight of the beast looking straight at him, but despite his emotions, he delivers a killing blow, managing to connect the stab. Van and the other nobles celebrate, as the sword reaches into the Hellboar's body and targets the heart. It's about to finish the beast off, but it suddenly rises up with a last-minute ability, sending everything flying away. This is called the spell of Cursebreak, and only a few of the magic beasts possess such a special ability. The Hellboar's roar is drenched in mana, allowing everything in the surrounding area to be blasted explosively. The Sword Noble spits out blood. His organs have been ruptured from sustaining internal damage. The Hellboar is the one who is back on the offense and seems like it's going to win this fight, while the kid watches in horror, accepting his sorry fate. Suddenly, Van steps up front to block the whole weight of the charge using his body, a fusion technique called the Lance Spirale. What it does is redirect the impact into the ground, spiraling it around the user. Confused and frustrated, the boar puts more force into its charge, making it impossible for Van to keep up with the redirection. Cornered, he wonders if he has to use his trump card, and even though it poses a risk to his body, it's still the only chance they've got to escape death. But first he tells the other kid to run away, and the kid quickly flees the battle scene too. Now that they're left alone, Van tries his best to block the force, but the hellboar flings him straight into the nearest tree, crushing him. The kid with the bad leg tries to reach him for help, but our boy orders him to stay back. The hellboar also charges to kill Van now that he's knocked down. It's overall a tense moment, and things really look like they're coming to an end. Suddenly, the former assassin chants a specific battle cry, unleashing all of his limitations. The creature is suddenly struck by a long-range projectile, knocking it to the side. This unexpected attack is a magic spell. Van knows it all too well and stares at the attacker. In a twist of fate, it's Heinz. The prince himself has come to save them. The other nobles quickly tend to him and suggest that he leave at once, but Heinz refuses to do such a thing, believing that it's the duty of the royal to protect its people. His words raise the morale of the elites, but our boy knows his words are complete bullshit. He always uses them to persuade others, before sending those people straight to their deaths. Heinz acts all buddy-buddy with the nobles, thinking that working together is enough to kill the creature, but Van has heard enough and slams a no in his face. This reaction stuns the prince, who asks what he wants. Van reaffirms another no, refusing to take the help of the prince. The other nobles shout at him for using vile speech against the prince, the same guy who had just saved their lives. However, Van has a different opinion, arguing that he would have finished the monster if not for the interruption. His words seem arrogant and provocative to them. It's kinda like a gamer talking rubbish in a game after losing. Heinz watches Van confront the hellboar all alone. The cool kid even orders the prince to sit back and watch, as he's gonna handle everything on his own. The hellboar advances full speed again. Ralph is hoping to land just one more clean hit, but Van tells him to stay out because recklessly charging will lead to their own deaths. Not even the Valtreich kid can take another hit. They're all clinging to their last lives. Van orders them to stay ready and wait for his signal, slightly annoying Heinz, who watches with curiosity. It's go time, with Van signaling that they have to finish the monster now. He's the first one to take the charge, facing the beast directly. Back there, he lost his cool, but this time, he's not going to use the trump card technique and handle the fight strategically. Like last time, the hellboar lunges at him, but our boy counters with a propulsive rising strike. Having already failed 3 charges, the beast actually began taking them seriously as competent opponents. That's why the hellboar began striking with more precaution in every hit. Knowing that it's a feint strike, Van swings into motion, happy to see that he can block the attack safely because the monster isn't overly ambitious anymore. The hellboar roars and tries to slam him with its tusks, but Van carefully manipulates his body in a way that he dodges each attack. The other nobles as well as Heinz are shocked that he's got this much speed without even using magic, while the hellboar receives another heavy hit from Van, who is carefully pushing his center of gravity to win. It's a technique so perfect that Heinz has only seen it demonstrated by high-level mages. The fight continues with Van toying with the hellboar's body, attacking as often as he can and targeting its head. Regardless, none of his attacks are enough to completely down the monster, especially since Van doesn't have any kind of magic enhancement to boost his hits. To this beast, his punches are nothing more than a bunch of taps, which is why the hellboar is gaining confidence. Heinz thinks it's a bad thing, but our boy actually wants this to happen. He's trying to frustrate the beast into making mistakes. Activating its special roar ability, Van can finally see the same roar breaker attack about to burst. It's here that he instructs the wind user to unleash his spell, so the noble activates rending sky once more, plowing all of his winds inside the monster's mouth. This results in a blockage of the beast's airways and erupts its own attack inside its mouth. Dazed on the ground, Van capitalizes on the moment by descending directly in front of the monster. Next, he brings his hands close and triggers Doppelganger, a secret move to create his own shockwave. The blow releases shockwaves from both sides, aiming to crush the beast's skull from the inside. This time the attack lands perfectly, and the monster finally is down for the count. With the magic barrier now gone, Van immediately shouts at the noble kid, telling him that this is the perfect chance to grab the spotlight. The noble kid reacts without hesitation and follows through, tearing into the boar's head and finishing it off once and for all. The wind magic kid can't hold back his disbelief, saying how insane it is that they somehow managed to defeat a hellsboar. Meanwhile, Van slowly gets back on his feet and walks over to the noble kid, offering him a hand. He asks if the guy is alright and whether he can still stand. For the moment, the noble kid drops his usual discrimination and grabs our boy's hand to pull himself up. As he complains that his entire body felt like it was about to break from that sonic wave, Van calmly explains that the attack was infused with magic, which is why it disrupted his balance so badly. The former assassin then advises him to cover his ears next time, mentioning that doing so would reduce the impact significantly. The noble kid lets out a faint smile and says he will keep that in mind, though he admits that he would prefer it if he never has to face a hellsboar ever again. Once they are done dealing with the monster, Van shifts his attention to the flowers they were supposed to collect to pass the exam. However, it turns out that only 2 Heaven's Tear blooms are left. That immediately reminds our hero of what the examiner said earlier about things getting complicated when too many people work together. A hint of anxiety creeps in as he starts wondering what he should do, Knowing there is no time left to search for more, before he can come up with a plan, the Wind Magic Kid quickly steps forward and grabs both flowers without hesitation. He then walks up to Prince Heinz and respectfully offers one of them to him, and the prince accepts it with a calm expression, thanking him in return. Watching this, our boy cannot help but mock the noble kid, pointing out how he just handed over a flower to someone who was merely standing there as a spectator. He even suggests that it almost looks like some kind of bribe. The noble kid immediately gets irritated and fires back, arguing that this is simply the duty of a loyal retainer. However, when he turns and brings the second flower toward Van, our boy is genuinely caught off guard. He clearly wasn't expecting something like this to happen. For a moment, he just stands there, unable to process it, and even asks if the noble kid handed it over by mistake. The noble kid calmly replies that he did it on purpose, saying that he simply wanted to return the favor since he has no intention of owing a dirtborn anything. On top of that, he tells Van to stop calling him Wind User, reminding him that he actually has a proper name. He introduces himself as Falk, while the other noble kid also steps forward and introduces himself as Ralph. Van responds in kind, giving his own name, and the two sides exchange a brief handshake. Just as our boy remarks that they probably will not be seeing each other again if the two of them fail the exam, the prince suddenly stops them and tells them to wait for a moment. Heinz then picks up a few flowers that had already faded and uses his light magic to make them bloom once again. The moment the petals regain their color, the noble kids are left stunned. Their eyes lighten up as they express how honored they feel to witness such a graceful act from the prince. Our boy, however, cuts through the moment and reminds them that the sun is about to set, and they need to head back quickly. Falk immediately snaps back, telling him to stop ordering them around, especially when the prince himself is standing right there with them. Just as they are about to leave, Prince Heinz suddenly brings up something he noticed earlier. He points out how Van was carefully covering his footprints with dirt along the way. From what he knows, the ability to erase one's trail like that is a technique commonly used by assassins. He goes on to explain that the martial skills he witnessed during the fight, along with Van's subtle habits, strongly suggest that he is not just an ordinary person, but someone trained to be a professional assassin. Hearing this, our boy feels a slight tension building up inside him. He starts to wonder if he might have gone a bit too far and revealed more than he should have. It turns out that Prince Heinz himself carries a fair share of worries, as he is surrounded by enemies on all sides. His father, the king, had married numerous princesses from conquered lands to strengthen his rule, creating a complicated web of royal politics. Heinz's mother, the fifth queen, is originally a noble from within the kingdom itself, which gives him a unique standing. Because of this, the other queens and even his older siblings view him as a threat, fearing that the king might favor him as the next heir to the throne. With that kind of pressure hanging over him, Heinz is constantly on guard, knowing that an assassin could come after him at any moment. And because of everything he has just observed, he now starts suspecting that Van himself could be an agent sent to eliminate him. If that turns out to be true, then this is not something he can afford to ignore, and he considers dealing with the situation right then and there. Meanwhile, sweat slowly trickles down Van's face as he realizes that old habits really do not fade away. No matter what he does, he cannot change the fact that he used to be an assassin before his regression. The real problem is that he cannot admit something like that, and even if he did, no one here would truly get it. Because of that, he knows he has no choice but to come up with a convincing bluff to get out of this mess. Van plays it cool and casually responds, saying that he never knew those techniques were considered part of an assassin's etiquette. Prince Heinz, however, sees right through that lame excuse, clearly not buying it for even a second. Still, our boy shifts his tone and tells him to believe whatever he wants, emphasizing that what he said is the truth. With every passing second, the atmosphere grows tense. Van then slowly starts walking toward Prince Heinz. Falk immediately steps in, trying to block his path, but in the very next moment, our boy disappears from sight and reappears right in front of the prince, casually placing a hand on his shoulder. He tells him that he was only joking and asks him to stop making such a serious and intimidating face. Van then explains that he is simply not used to speaking politely, brushing it off by saying he is just a country boy who was never properly taught these kinds of manners. He gives a slight bow, carefully maintaining his composure while making sure not to reveal what he is truly feeling inside. Heinz, however, is not interested in going around in circles and tells him to stop dodging the question. He once again brings up the footwork Van used, pointing out how it looked almost like teleportation, and directly asks him if he is an assassin. This time, Van finally puts forward a more believable excuse, claiming that he learned that move from Helene Steinhardt's, the very same person who recommended him to this place. He then lies that the lady had advised him to hide his techniques whenever possible, since martial arts are the only real weapon he has. Deep down, the boy feels a slight sense of guilt for using her name without permission, but at the same time, his answer finally seems to put the prince at ease. Even Ralph looks visibly shaken the moment he hears her name, making it clear that her family stands at a level respected even among royalty. Hearing such a powerful name, the prince recalls the woman known as the Ice Flower Lady. He knows very well that she stands among the top figures in the academy. The only thing he finds hard to believe is that someone like her would be familiar with assassin techniques, yet he does not dwell on it for long. After all, he is confident that her house would never be involved in something as dangerous as plotting the assassination of a prince. Ralph then questions Van, asking why someone of Helene's caliber would ever recommend a dirt-born nobody. Our boy simply replies that he does not know the reason himself, explaining that all she told him was to go to the academy along with her recommendation. The prince steps in and shares his own assumption, suggesting that Helene might have planned to train Van personally and eventually bring him into her house. The other noble kids begin to agree after witnessing Van's abilities firsthand. With that, the prince finally softens his tone and politely thanks him, admitting that he might have ended up in serious danger if he had encountered the beast on his own. He openly says that he owes his life to Van, and even bows slightly to show his respect. Van, however, remains as blunt as ever, and casually remarks that they were not fighting for the prince's sake in the first place. Falk immediately scolds him for his disrespectful attitude, but our boy could not care less, especially after everything he has gone through. The prince quietly takes note of this, realizing how the boy chooses to throw subtle insults at him instead of asking for any kind of reward. As the shift comes to an end, students begin returning from the forest. Some of them carry the flowers they managed to gather, while others come back bruised, exhausted, and empty-handed. A sense of dread hangs over them as they worry about how they will face their families after failing to secure a place in such a prestigious academy. Meanwhile, the cunning professor cannot help but grow anxious as the prince still has not returned. He had carefully ensured that only weaker beasts were present in the forest, ones the prince could easily deal with. What troubles him even more is the fact that the Hell's Boar has not shown up either. Just then, a group of 4 finally emerges from the forest. While the professor feels relieved the moment he sees the prince safe and sound, that relief quickly turns into anger the instant his eyes land on Van. The examiner greets our boy and asks whether he is safe and sound. On the other side, their professor completely loses his composure and blurts out that he should have been dead by now. Acting all innocent, our boy calmly asks if the man has a problem with him surviving. The professor quickly realizes he slipped up and forces himself to stay composed. Man says he was just shocked to see that Van made it back alive. However, Van casually informs them that he is not alone either. One by one, the boys step out from behind him, struggling to drag a massive piece of luggage across the ground. The professor nearly has a stroke, staring in disbelief at what he thinks it is. Even the examiner does a double take and asks whether that is truly a magic beast. The students explain that they suspect it was sent to assassinate the prince, so they brought back the head as proof. Both instructors fall silent, but for very different reasons. The examiner cannot comprehend how something that dangerous ended up roaming the forest, while the professor is stunned that it failed to eliminate its target. All eyes turn toward the professor when he is caught off guard again. Fortunately for him, His Highness draws everyone's attention by openly praising the group. The moment he sees the prince standing there unharmed, the professor's disappointment deepens. The examiner respectfully asks His Highness whether he took part in the battle. The prince calmly replies that he merely observed from the sidelines. At that instant, the professor realizes he is trapped in a dangerous position. If anyone discovers he released a magic beast against the prince, his career, and possibly his life, are finished. His Highness then innocently asks the professor why he looks so unusually pale. The professor immediately switches tactics and begins praising the prince's supposed achievement in slaying such a powerful beast. His Highness gently corrects him, reminding the absent-minded professor that he did nothing of the sort. The true heroes were the others. Most importantly, Van was the key figure who single-handedly ensured their survival. That comes as a shock to both instructors. Everyone is alarmed, completely refusing to believe that a Galda could be the strongest among them. Ralph immediately backs him up, saying that Van possesses an abnormal level of magical knowledge for a Galda. Meanwhile, Dietrich shyly confirms that His Highness's praise of Van's abilities is well-deserved. The professor stares in stunned silence, refusing to accept that a Galda is taking the spotlight. But His Highness delivers the final push, calmly stating that it only makes sense for someone chosen by the House of Steinhertz. Van did not exactly learn much from Helene, yet he decides to play along without correcting anyone. After that, rumors quickly begin spreading about the abilities of the Galda chosen by the Ice Blossom Lady. In response, the examiner offers our boy his deepest gratitude. Protecting the prince is considered the highest service to the kingdom. Blunt as ever, Van immediately corrects him, saying he never protected the prince at all. That was simply a side effect of defeating the magic beast. With that said, he shifts the conversation back to what actually matters. One by one, all of the boys take out a blue flower. The examiner turns toward the professor with an expectant look. As much as it pains him, the man is forced to make an official announcement. He names the 3 boys one by one, reluctantly including Van as well, confirming that they have all passed. Now our hero is officially enrolled in the academy. With everything settled, the prince orders the examiner to conduct a detailed investigation into the magic beast's appearance. The scene then shifts to the academy's welcome ceremony. The headmaster makes it clear to all students that the academy does not exist for those merely adept in magic. Its purpose is to shape young talents into noble warriors who fight for and protect the kingdom. Among all the magic users, Van feels quietly satisfied that his life has finally changed for the better. In his first life, he could not even imagine stepping foot inside the academy, let alone enrolling as a student. Watching from above, Helene silently observes the young genius who holds the potential to end the world's deep-rooted prejudice against the Galda people. Later, she walks down the hall that leads to an intricately decorated door. Inside the chamber is a round table with 5 seats, only one of which is still empty. The other 4 glare at the young lady who is testing their patience. Sword Princess Karina Ryutel criticizes Helene for arriving with such a pleased expression after wasting her precious time. Meanwhile, Amelia Rodewald remains calm and simply asks what the purpose of this sudden meeting is. The Quiet Fist, Arnold Clavis, states that there is only one agenda on the table tonight. 8th Prince Leonis spells it out clearly, saying their purpose is to decide how to deal with the imposter among them. Confused, Amelia wonders aloud what exactly he means by that. Arnold then explains that the enrollment of the first Galda student in history caused a massive uproar among the nobles. Karina scoffs at the decision, joking that at this rate they might as well start enrolling monsters next. However, the one who seems to have the biggest issue with Van's admission is Leonis. He bluntly turns toward Helene, the final member of the 5 Radiant Crowns. He demands a darn good explanation for why she recommended a filthy Galda into their prestigious academy. In the academy, nobles and powerful magi from across the kingdom gather under one roof. Even among elites like them, it is common for fights and disputes to break out over pride. To manage these conflicts, 5 students known as the 5 Radiant Crowns have disciplinary authority over the academy. Leonis demands an explanation for why someone of Helene's status would make such a foolish decision. Without hesitation, Helene replies that she witnessed Van's strength with her own eyes and acknowledged his talent. The Sword Princess, however, struggles to place the words strong and Galda in the same sentence. She refuses to believe that people cursed from birth could be anything but weak and useless in combat. Even the calm and composed Amelia agrees that it is illogical. A race that possesses no magic simply cannot stand their ground in a fight. Leonis condescendingly remarks that it seems Helene lacks such basic common sense. Helene is ticked off when he mentions common sense. She says common sense is merely an excuse to stop people from thinking and to force foolish beliefs onto others. Leonis begins to boil, unable to handle a woman undermining his authority. At that moment, Arnold calmly suggests a practical solution. They can simply test whether Van truly has the skills Helene claims. Leonis immediately takes an interest in the idea. He goes further and proposes a punishment to humiliate Helene if Van fails the test. Though Helene is unsure what he is plotting, she offers a polite warning not to underestimate her choice. That remark irritates Karina, who volunteers to personally evaluate his abilities. Leonis gives her full approval to crush the outsider. As Karina walks past Helene, she mockingly asks if the Galda boy tickled her fancy. Karina makes it clear that the only thing she's interested in is shattering Helene's favored toy along with that proud attitude of hers. 1 week passes after classes begin, and Van walks through the hallways alone. Aside from the occasional stare and quiet hostility, things are going surprisingly smoothly for him. He recalls how in the previous class, the instructor asked him an advanced question on magic theory to embarrass him. All the students stayed silent because the topic was far beyond their level. The sloppy instructor brushed it off, claiming it was dumb to expect a Galda to answer such a question in the first place. He rubbed it in that Van's people are not exactly known for reading books. However, Van humbled him and showed who's boss, taking over the lecture and effectively turning the wrinkled old professor's lesson into his own. After that incident, he has not seen anyone try to pull a fast one on him again. Suddenly, he snaps back to reality with a slap on the back from Ralph, who invites him to join him for lunch. Our boy thanks him for the support. Ralph looks confused, clueless about what he means. The two then head toward the cafeteria together. On their way there, a purple-haired girl suddenly calls out to him. She looks genuinely offended, as if he committed an outrageous crime by walking past her without offering a proper greeting. The two sincerely apologize, yet Van's eyes widen in shock when she raises her blade right up to his neck. He bluntly asks the crazy what her problem is. She stares at him with a holier-than-thou smirk, claiming it is only natural for a Galda to bow with his forehead pressed against the floor. My guy calmly replies that they are both students of the same academy. He has no intention of bowing just because she believes he should. Hearing that, she coldly asks whether he even understands his true status within these walls. Suddenly, Ralph steps forward to back up his friend, saying she is going too far. The girl insists that enforcing discipline is necessary to ensure everyone remains obedient to their superiors. Van nods slightly, agreeing that seniors deserve respect. However, it does not sit well with him when some unstable stranger tries to force that respect at blade point. He firmly grips her sword, making it impossible for her to push or pull it away. With a sharp twist, he forces her into a panic. She pours more strength into the blade, and in that instant, he delivers a precise chop that snaps it clean in two. When she recognizes the sever edge technique, the formerly arrogant girl begins to sweat heavily. Attacking him with a cheap zinc alloy blade was an amateur mistake. Zinc blades are popular among novices because they channel magic easily, but they are far too brittle for a serious fight. The girl bitterly complains she is not allowed to carry a proper sword on campus. That privilege belongs exclusively to the 5 Radiant Crowns. Hearing that title for the first time, Van becomes curious. Right on cue, the Sword Princess steps onto the scene and formally accuses him of disrespecting a senior and destroying personal property. The purple-haired girl immediately lowers her head and addresses her as Lady Karina. The name alone triggers a sharp reaction in our hero's memory. In his previous life, there was no one who did not know the name Karina the Bloodblade. His brain short-circuits, wondering why the Angel of Death herself is standing here inside the academy. Van recalls that back when he lived as an assassin before his regression, the kingdom was tangled in multiple uprisings. Among them was a ruthless purification faction known as the White Annihilation Ring, and the one name he remembers the most from that group is Lady Karina. He remembers her as the Blood Edge, a terrifying figure who had slaughtered countless heroes. In order to wipe out the White Annihilation Ring, the kingdom had to make immense sacrifices. All of that chaos eventually led to another devastating conflict, the war for the succession of the throne. Our boy had only seen Karina once on the battlefield, but that single encounter was enough to etch her image permanently into his memory. Because of that, he cannot comprehend what one of the kingdom's greatest future enemies is doing here, standing within its own prestigious academy. While Van is lost in these thoughts, Karina notices him staring and adds it to his list of offenses. She calls his behavior rude, pointing out how he is openly gawking at an upperclassman. Our boy quickly apologizes, but at the same time mocks the idea, casually remarking that he does not see her as someone above him. The noble kid tries to stop Van from provoking her any further, repeatedly warning him about who she really is. He explains that she is one of the 5 Radiants. When our boy acts clueless, Ralph steps in and clarifies that the 5 Radiants are the top 5 elites of the academy, individuals whose abilities are on a completely different level. He introduces Karina as a prodigy who entered the academy at the age of 13. Hearing this, Van pieces things together and realizes that Karina must have originally been the daughter of a high noble. The fact that he never knew this in his previous life means that her background must have been covered up after she turned into a rebel. He never imagined that he would run into her here, at this stage of her life. That thought leads him to something even darker. Van begins to wonder if this might be his chance to eliminate her before everything spirals out of control. If he cuts her down now, he could potentially erase the roots of the future rebellion itself. And if that rebellion never happens, then the War of Succession might never take place either, which would also mean that Heinz may never ascend the throne. As the boy remains lost in thought, Karina notices it once again. She warns him that she is officially permitted to carry a real blade, and then shifts into a stance so refined and lethal that it feels capable of killing someone in an instant without even revealing the motion of the strike. Ralph urgently tells our boy to apologize before he risks his life, but Van calmly replies that he wants to confirm something first, and tells him to step back. He takes up a fighting stance of his own, effectively provoking her to attack. The Thousand-Blade Sword Princess, already irritated beyond restraint, moves in with the intent to kill. Her strike comes at a speed that ordinary eyes cannot follow, yet Van narrowly avoids it, taking only a slight graze instead of a fatal blow. Karina quickly declares that she is stopping the punishment for now, insisting that she will continue it at a later time, and then leaves the area alongside the purple-haired girl. When they arrive somewhere secluded, away from any observers, the purple-haired girl asks why she allowed the boy to go. The Thousand-Blade Sword Princess struggles for a moment, maintaining her composure, then lowers herself to the ground and replies that she was not the one who let him go. She makes it clear that this incident must not reach anyone else's ears, all while revealing the injury she sustained from the boy's encounter. She then recalls that she saw this before in an old martial arts book, and it is known as the Heartcore Point. This is a vital spot that targets the nerves, so the victim gets paralyzed and cannot walk properly after this. The purple-haired girl then asks if it was a stalemate, but Karina remains silent. On the inside, she is sure that wasn't the case at all. What actually happened was that during the fight, she was aiming for his neck. However, Van managed to slip in close to her and ruthlessly targeted her weak point. She tried to retreat in an attempt to dodge, but because of that, she missed her target. Our boy then rushed in and hit her vital point with dead accuracy. Karina is more shaken since this is the exact same move taught in renowned sword schools and wonders where the hell Van learned it from. The purple-haired NPC is high on copium and states that it wasn't a tie at all. She continues that Karina is the victor since she was the last one standing. The Sword Princess pretends to agree with her, but deep down she knows the truth. This particular vital point doesn't actually kill the person, but instead hurts like hell, so this move was done deliberately. If this were a life or death situation, she is certain that she would have gotten an economy class ticket straight to the afterlife. Brushing those thoughts aside, she gets up and says that she got careless. However, next time she will make sure to bring a sword to break that Garuda once and for all. Back to our hero. Ralph asks him what exactly he wanted to confirm back then. Van brushes him off, but the guy keeps pestering him, demanding an explanation. However, our hero gets lost in thought, realizing that despite her hostile attitude, the Sword Princess was holding back a lot and didn't even use her special magic ability. Even though she called it a punishment, she didn't actually try to do anything serious. Van then says out loud that Karina is a nice girl, which catches Ralph by surprise. But our hero is now completely sure that she isn't the Bloodblade for now, and gets determined to help change her fate. Ralph just drops the topic, saying that our boy probably hit his head too hard or something. When Van returns to the classroom, everyone immediately stops talking and avoids his gaze. He then takes his seat, and all the classmates immediately start gossiping about what happened in the hallway. Our boy manages a nervous smile, but then his two lackeys appear and reassure him that trash opinions will always stink. Ralph offers to go with him to apologize to the Sword Princess, while Falk reassures him that he will get his father to smooth things over. Van tells the two good-hearted guys to stop sticking their noses into other people's matters. He teases them that they have completely changed from when they first met, but appreciates their help. However, he intends to solve the matter with his own hands. That makes the two lackeys shocked, and they ask what he means by that. Our hero tells himself that in order to prevent the Blood Blade from ever coming into existence, he has to face her right here and now. Van then cracks a cold joke that the 5 Radiants are just students in charge of the school's discipline, so they aren't anything special. Falk and Ralph are flabbergasted by his comment and ask if he is truly aware of what's happening. Just then, everyone's attention shifts toward Helene as she enters the classroom and loudly calls out his name. Leaning back in his seat, he asks her what is going on. She politely requests that he accompany her for a short while, promising it will not take long since she has another class soon. He quietly stares at her for a moment, but this is not an invitation he can refuse. After they leave together, the entire class is left stunned. No one ever spoke to the Ice Blossom Lady in such a casual manner before. The scene shifts to a tea table set in the middle of a flower garden, a perfect place for a private conversation. Helene smiles gently as she delivers the news that the 5 Radiants have decided to send Karina to test his abilities. He sarcastically replies that her warning came a little late. Helene remains cheerful, admitting she did not expect Karina to challenge him so quickly. Karina is destined to lead the renowned swordsman Luthier family, so her extraordinary skill does not surprise Van. However, he senses that she is not merely another talented heir. There is something deeper about her. Helene tilts her head and asks what he means. Unsure how to phrase it, he says she feels like someone who abandoned everything in life except training her sword. Helene's eyes narrow slightly at that observation, and she quietly praises his sharp insight. She reveals that Karina is not simply another noble child of the Luthier family. In fact, she was born from an affair with a maid, and was never formally acknowledged as legitimate. That perception changed when she turned 10 years old. During a friendly spar, she completely overwhelmed her 17-year-old brother. At the time, everyone assumed her brother would inherit the family name, but her overwhelming display of talent forced them to reconsider. Despite facing resentment and jealousy her entire life, she was ultimately named the next head of the family, regardless of her birth status. Hearing all this, Van wonders how Helene knows such personal details as an outsider. Helene laughs softly and says noble society thrives on gossip. Setting that aside, she recalls the first time she saw Karina before the academy entrance ceremony, at a formal gathering. The girl stood alone in a quiet corner, while no one bothered to even say hi. She remained silent, calmly observing as her father ignored her presence and spoke to others like she didn't even exist. His lack of love and indifference was clearly visible in her empty, soulless eyes. Seeing how much concern she shows for the girl, he asks why she did not approach Karina back then. Helene explains that it was not so simple. As the heir of another powerful noble house, stepping in would be difficult. It is seen as a Steinhertz interfering in the internal matters of the Luthier family. Van sighs, seriously annoyed by how exhausting noble traditions are. Helene continues, saying that Karina probably does not even remember that night. With the way her family politics are unfolding, she fears the girl may eventually walk down the wrong path. Van's expression turns serious as he asks what she would do if that were to happen. Helene answers without hesitation that she would use every ounce of her power to stop her. Otherwise, she would never be able to wash away the past regret buried in her heart. At that moment, all the pieces begin to fall into place. He always believed Helene had the potential to become a legendary hero, whose name goes down in history books. Yet he never heard of her in his previous life. Her life was probably cut short while trying to bring Karina back after she lost herself. As if sensing his thoughts, Helene warns him not to get sentimental toward her. She remains a ruthless swordswoman, a brilliant one who would not hesitate to cut him down. Our boy replies confidently that he understands that perfectly, and that this conversation has only motivated him further. He looks straight into her eyes and swears he will erase her regrets. In his last life, Karina was unstoppable, but this time, he has the opportunity to stop the threat at its source. Surprised by his resolve, Helene admits she feels somewhat relieved hearing those words. She was hoping he would help her. Still, words alone mean nothing. She asks whether he actually knows a method to counter her invincible sword mastery. Van assures her that he does, and casually invites her to meet after school so he can demonstrate it. Later that evening, Ralph and Falk head into the forest searching for him. Falk feels uneasy about following their friend like this. Meanwhile, Ralph is mad sus about where he disappeared to without saying a word. It is impossible not to get curious after seeing him sneak off into the forest alone with the Ice Princess. Falk tries to brush it off and change the subject. That's when they spot our hero standing in the middle of a freezing storm. In front of him, Helene is not holding back. A storm of icicles and sharp ice lances rains down toward him without mercy. When he hears their panicked voices, he turns around. The ruthless Ice Princess does not believe in timeouts. She punishes him for looking away from his opponent mid-fight, unleashing the 1,000 thorns of the ice garden. Massive vines of thick ice surge forward at the three. Ralph and Falk regret their life choices. At that moment, Van delivers a single perfectly focused strike, shattering the entire attack in one clean blow. He spins around with a cheeky smile on his face, telling them they have perfect timing. He invites them to join Helene's side and attack him, bragging he has trouble finding a real challenge here. Simon walks in and greets Karina. Karina is not in a very good mood today, so she asks him straight to the point if His Highness needs something. Simon replies that he does not want to rush her, but he is curious about what she has planned to deal with the Garuda at the duel. Karina bows slightly and tells Simon that it will happen very soon because the item she requested from her family has finally arrived. Hearing that, a gleam of mischief lights up Simon's eyes when he sees Anastasia entering while struggling to carry a very heavy coffin. Anastasia asks Karina where it should be taken. Karina calmly instructs her to take it to her room and to handle it with great care. Simon can hardly believe what he is seeing. Something so ancient, something so artifact-like, and something so powerful stands right in front of him. Karina then asks Simon if that would be enough for the task ahead, and if it might be going overboard just to kill such a Garuda. Simon, however, clearly wants the event to become a spectacle rather than something quiet and simple. He comments to Karina that someone like her is a bare blade in human form, someone whose power and skill deserve a proper stage. For someone like her, there is no stage better suited than this moment to show everyone the mastery she possesses. Meanwhile, a notice appears on the student board, and the entire academy quickly begins to talk about it. The announcement states that Karina, one of the 5 brilliant crowns, has officially challenged the first-year student Van to a duel as punishment for disturbing public order. The news spreads across the academy almost instantly, and students gather around the board while whispering among themselves. Everyone knows that this is not an ordinary duel. Many of them quietly say that it feels more like a prepared death trap. The battle will take place in the Royal Academy's great training grounds, which students commonly call the Chalk Ring Arena. This arena is not just any place for practice. It is a sacred stage used for official duels between students, and also for special trials that test the limits of one's strength and courage. Because of that reputation, the arena carries great weight within the academy. When the day of the duel finally arrives, the air feels tense and restless. Students gather from every corner of the academy, filling the stands with loud voices and curious stares. At the center of the arena, Van quietly stretches his limbs while waiting for the duel to begin. The crowd grows larger with every passing minute, because everyone wants to witness what they believe will become one of the most unforgettable duels the academy has ever seen. Ralph comments that the mood in the arena feels quite grim. Falk replies that he already knows why so many people have gathered here today. They all understand that this is not truly going to be a duel. Ralph looks confused by that statement, so Helene calmly explains it to him. She says that this is not a duel at all. It is a punishment. It is a fight between one of the 5 Radiant and a Garda, and everyone believes it can only end in a one-sided slaughter. That is what the crowd expects to see, and that is exactly what most of them have come here for. Ralph responds that maybe that is the common way other people see it. Falk then finishes his thought and says that they already know what kind of power Van possesses, and he is not someone who can be measured with common sense. Helene then glances toward the prince who is watching the arena from above and quietly remarks that even he seems to believe the same thing. Sure enough, Prince Heinz is present among the spectators and observes everything with calm attention. Simon notices him from a distance and wonders to himself why the prince has come to watch this duel, yet no clear answer comes to his mind. Soon, the large doors of the arena slowly open, and Karina walks in while holding the heavy coffin with both hands. The moment Ralph sees it, he looks worried and confused, and Helene explains to him that Karina has truly brought out something extremely powerful for this fight. Even Van cannot hide his surprise when he notices the coffin standing in front of him. He lets out a nervous joke and says that perhaps she has brought a coffin meant for him, though he adds that thinking so might be a bit too presumptuous on her part. Karina tells him to drop the act, because that coffin will soon become the reason for his death. With that, she opens it and reveals multiple swords stored within it, along with magical realms embedded inside the structure. The weapon is known as the Sword Coffin. It is a portable armory that has been passed down through generations by the Sword Saints of House Luthier. Falk reacts with disbelief and wonders why the Sword Saints would even think of creating something like that. Karina then pulls out one of the swords and points it directly at Van while declaring that she will make him regret ever setting foot inside their academy. Van now no longer looks unfazed or confused. His expression steadies and he answers that she will be the one who regrets it when he smashes her precious sword coffin in front of thousands of spectators. He then asks when the duel will begin. Karina replies that it has already begun as both of them charge straight at each other. What Karina does not expect is the sheer speed Van begins to use against her. One moment he stands far away, and in the very next split second he appears right in front of her face. Karina quickly blocks the attack and Van comments that she has good reflexes. In truth, she is confused, and so is everyone else watching the fight. None of them understand how a Garuda can move that fast. Many in the crowd assume that he must be using instant movement magic. That explanation spreads quickly among the students because nothing else seems possible to them. Yet that idea should be impossible because someone they consider a lowlife should not be capable of using magic at all. Falk watches closely and admits that no matter how many times he has seen Van perform this trick, it still looks exactly like magic to him. Helene calmly corrects him and explains that it is not magic at all. The technique is known as phantom step. Normally, when people move forward, they kick off the ground and their body follows through in a sequence of motions that takes time to complete. Van does not kick off the ground in that way. Instead, he slides his entire body forward by controlling his center of gravity, while using the rotation of his pelvis to generate force. That is the real nature of his footwork. Because of that movement, he appears to glide forward as if powerful springs are hidden inside his feet. Even after hearing the explanation, the boys still struggle to understand how it works. The truth is that when someone faces it in close combat, the movement looks exactly like teleportation. When Helene first witnessed this technique in the Garuda forest, she also believed she had just seen magic. Falk feels excited after realizing this advantage because it means Van should dominate at close range where a long sword cannot swing properly. However, the battle takes an unexpected turn. Karina suddenly lunges forward with her sword again and again, forcing Van to retreat while he receives a small cut on his arm. Karina has already realized that he wants to stay close in order to avoid the full reach of her blade. What Van does not anticipate is that long swords contain an unsharpened section near the hilt known as the ricasso. Through a technique called half-swording, a fighter can grip the ricasso with one hand and control the sword even at close range. Ralph remembers hearing about this technique being used on the battlefield, yet he never expects that it is something a noble lady would train herself to perform. Falk also begins to understand that the rumors calling Karina the next sword saint may not be empty praise, but a glimpse of her real destiny. Helene continues to observe the fight with sharp attention. In her mind, this decision still feels like a dangerous move when facing someone like Van. Karina once again closes the distance between them, and Van answers with a quick punch that lands against her and forces her slightly back. He does not stop there and charges forward once more to press the attack. Simon watches the exchange with a rough expression and thinks that Karina is simply taking hits without reacting properly. Anastasia quietly explains that for magic swordsmen, attacks that contain no magical energy are extremely difficult to read or evade. Because Van strikes with absolutely no magic power, his attacks appear completely unpredictable to them. Karina, however, does not seem worried at all. She actually enjoys the exchange because a magical barrier surrounds her body. She believes that ordinary physical strikes cannot pierce that defense unless Van somehow uses magic. Suddenly, a sharp ringing explodes inside her ear, as if her eardrum has burst, and a wave of red sensation floods through her body. Shocked and unsteady, she asks Van what he has done to her, and Van answers with a cheeky smile and suggests that perhaps her magical concentration is simply sloppy because of the place where she came from, and his response only fuels Karina's anger even further. Next, Van explains that the technique he had used earlier is called air palm. It works by using wind pressure released from a palm strike. The force of that compressed air travels as a shockwave that strikes directly into the semicircular canals of the inner ear. The explanation spreads through the arena while people hold their breath and watch the unbelievable sight unfolding before them. Lady Karina, the proud sword princess, is actually being pushed back. Simon is stiffed as he watches her retreat, and frustration rises inside him, because to him it looks as if a noble is appearing weak in front of everyone. Karina is still struggling with the painful ringing inside her head when Van calmly asks if they should simply end the duel here. Right after saying that, he springs toward her again to finish the exchange. However, Karina slowly raises her head and a sinister smile spreads across her face. At that moment, everyone realizes something is wrong. The retreat is never a weakness. It is part of her plan. She suddenly slams her blade into the ground and a violent wave of power erupts outward. Shockwaves ripple through the arena floor and scatter dust and fragments of stone everywhere. The spectators look around in alarm while Van braces himself and studies the attack. From what he can see, she merely swings her sword with mana flowing through it. Even without a direct strike, the wave of power alone shakes his body to the core. Karina then explains that this is the reason why generations of sword saints devote themselves to mastering the Heavenfall blade. Van also notices the drawback of the technique because the sword itself struggles to endure the strain created by the enormous power flowing through it. Simon finally allows himself to smile again. He concludes that Karina has clearly been holding back until this moment. Now that she reveals this level of strength, it becomes obvious to him that Van will not be able to endure it. In his mind, the result is already decided. If Van fails to withstand the next strike, then nothing but his bones will remain. Yet Van shows no fear at all. Instead, he calmly tells Karina that she should treat her weapon with more care. Karina answers that she normally would, but now she intends to finish this foolish duel with the next swing of her sword. At that moment, she releases even more power into the blade. The spectators grow anxious as they realize she may truly intend to kill him. Ralph and Falk whisper nervously to each other while trying to understand what is happening. Helene interrupts them and explains the situation clearly. She says that Van attacks are landing successfully, but they still lack the power to defeat Karina in a single blow. Karina, on the other hand, possesses the Heavenfall blade, which can erase Van with a single strike. This means that Karina is deliberately allowing his attacks to land, because she wants to turn the fight into a spectacle. Helene adds that if Karina unleashes the Heavenfall blade at the same time Van approaches her, then even if he avoids the direct strike, the aftershock alone will still kill him at point-blank range. Ralph and Falk fall silent as they wonder what Van plans to do next. Out on the battlefield, Karina raises her sword once again, and tells him to accept the treatment that suits someone of his status. She even says that if he does so, she might spare his life. Van responds with a playful and cheeky tone that she seems unusually obsessed with the idea of status. Karina replies that such thinking is simply the natural order of the world. In her eyes, mana strength determines the worth of a bloodline, and that principle forms the foundation of the country itself. Van suddenly laughs after hearing that explanation. He says that it sounds like the perfect answer a noble would give. Then he teases her again and asks if acting like a noble truly makes her become one. Karina does not understand why he says something like that, and the words irritate her deeply. Van continues pressing the point and reveals that she carries both commoner blood and noble blood within her veins. According to him, that is the reason she tries so desperately to prove herself as a real noble, so that her father will finally acknowledge her. Those words strike directly into her hidden weakness. Karina freezes for a moment because she cannot understand how he knows something so personal. Her anger surges uncontrollably, and she pours even more power into her blade. The people watching the fight grow worried for Van as the tension rises. Helene immediately understands what Van is doing. She realizes that he is deliberately provoking Karina so that she will unleash an all-out strike without thinking. Ralph cannot understand the reasoning behind such a reckless move. He wonders why Van would push her so far and risk his life just to force that reaction from her. Van's comment is not actually baseless. In truth, it reaches directly into Karina's deepest secret and the shame she has carried for years. She has always felt like a foreigner that somehow slipped into noble society. She is the daughter of a nobleman, but she is born from a concubine, and because of that, she never truly belongs within the noble family. While growing up, she watches the nobles carefully. She studies how they perform their duties, yet despite learning all those things, she never feels that she is truly one of them. She constantly sensed unseen eyes watching her and waiting for her to fail. That quiet pressure never left her. Because of that feeling, she experienced a brief moment of sympathy when she first saw Van walking through the academy with such bold confidence. Even though he is a Garuda, she felt that small connection. That is why she volunteered to test him in the first place, thinking she might settle the matter without killing him. However, Van never appreciated that small kindness, and instead dared to insult her. Because of that, she convinces herself that he deserves the full weight of her wrath. Karina swings her sword and declares that she will kill him. Van immediately closes the distance between them. Karina unleashes the Heavenfall blade and brings the strike down with full force. When the dust clears, she sees something that stops her breath. Van has used his bare hands to stop the attack, and he is now gripping her enormous sword firmly. The crowd cannot believe what they are seeing. A sword-snatching technique has just disarmed a blade using nothing but bare hands. Everyone believes that such a thing should be impossible. In real combat, no one should be able to stop a descending blade with their hands alone. Yet what Van performs in front of them becomes something entirely new. First, he matches the relative speed of his hand with the falling blade as closely as possible. Then the moment contact occurs, he begins to break the momentum. In the tiny instant before the sword completes its full swing, he disperses and absorbs the force by bending his knees and sinking toward the ground, which sends a crack running across the arena floor. The technique carries the name Stillglyph, known as a zero-style grasp. It is the same method he once used to drive Helene's ice spears into the ground inside the forest. Van smiles with a teasing tone and says that the Heavenfall blade is certainly a tremendous technique, but he simply understands how to kill the power behind it. Karina shouts that such a thing is impossible. In that brief moment, her guard slips as emotions surge through her mind. Van seizes the opportunity and strikes directly at her heart. The impact sends her flying backward until her body crashes against the coffin behind her. When she collapses, she ends up exactly where she now stands in the arena, down on her knees. She struggles to believe what has just happened. The entire crowd falls silent and holds its breath while staring at the 1,000-blade sword princess who has been forced to kneel. Some spectators even begin to wonder if this is the true power of the Garuda people. Simon and Anastasia grind their teeth in frustration, while Ralph and Falk quietly cheer in their hearts and hope Van keeps attacking without hesitation. Van, however, has a different intention. He waits calmly and gives Karina time to recover from her shock. When she finally gathers herself, she asks him why he does not finish her off. She rises slowly and weakly to her feet and asks if he intends to show her mercy, something she claims she does not need. Van refuses that idea immediately. He explains that mercy is not what he intends to give her. At the same time, he has no desire to bully a noble lady who is not fighting at her true strength. What he truly wants is for her to reveal everything she has. He tells her to show him the real Karina. His words strike her pride once again like an insult. In response, Karina unleashes the full power hidden within the coffin. She reaches inside and draws out one of the most famous weapons in the entire country. The blade is known as the Star Ring Sword. It is a spring sword forged from an extremely thin and flexible metal that bends and moves in unnatural ways. Van briefly recalls that in his previous life, such a weapon is known by the name of the Massacre Sword, Blood Chain Proulette. Karina stares at him with fierce determination and declares that she will show him exactly what she has sacrificed in order to stand where she stands today. This is precisely the moment that Van has been waiting for. Karina declares that if he truly wishes to see her full power, then she will gladly deliver it. She warns him that if he cannot withstand what comes next, then the blame will be his alone. With those words, she releases a raging storm of power from the coffin. A violent tornado of blades erupts outward and begins to swirl around her with terrifying force. Ralph and Falk stare in shock and wonder what they are looking at. They try to understand whether this is simply another form of swordsmanship, but the truth is something far greater. Helene explains to them that the technique is a national magic art circle known as Requiem. She tells them that it is an ultimate technique that only a handful of members from the luthier family can ever reach. Through magic, it amplifies the flexibility of the sword and drives the blade tip forward at supersonic speed. Van watches the violent tornado forming before him. The spinning storm looks like a dance of circling spears rotating endlessly in front of his eyes. Karina announces the name of the attack as the Dance of Circle Spears. She tells him that no one who enters its domain can survive. Flame or lightning or flesh all meet the same fate once the blades begin their dance. She also warns that the field will soon expand until it covers the entire arena. If Van is afraid, then he can simply admit defeat and run away. She claims she is generous enough to allow that escape. If he stubbornly remains inside the arena, then nothing will remain of him. Not even his bones will be left behind. Van listens to her without showing the slightest fear. He calmly answers that she does not need to bother expanding the attack because he will come to her instead. Van then closes his eyes for a brief moment. When he opens them again, he notices something new. The tornado moves incredibly fast, but it is not truly invisible. Faint lines of motion shimmer through the air, and he can finally see the path of the blades. At that moment, he activates a technique called tachypsychia. It is a strange phenomenon where the brain suddenly accelerates its processing speed under extreme stress. It is an unnatural defense mechanism humans possess that helps them locate the best path for survival while drowning in overwhelming information. Ordinary people experience it only by chance. Van has mastered the ability to trigger it whenever he wishes. Using that sharpened perception, he steps directly into the raging tornado. Just as he predicts, he is not instantly destroyed. Instead, he moves through the storm without being cut apart. Simon notices how easily Van deflects the attacks, and even the prince watches with growing confusion and fascination. Van has already understood the principle behind the weapon. In a spring sword, the center of gravity always remains at the blade tip. That means the entire attack depends on that single point of motion. If he strikes only the tip, then he can break the technique and win the fight. Karina looks at him with disbelief and admits that he truly is a monster. Van calmly answers that it is not about being a monster. He simply works harder than most people, just as she does. Karina cannot understand what he means by that statement. Her anger begins to rise again when Van continues speaking. He tells her that the spring sword chooses its own wielder. Anyone who lacks true mastery would end up cutting their own body with the blade. Being born into a bloodline of swordsmen is never enough to control such a weapon. Then he asks her how many years she has poured into mastering that single blade. Karina freezes slightly because she has never truly stopped to think about that question. Her mind drifts back into a distant memory from childhood. She remembers a moment when her father once taught her how to hold a sword. Perhaps for him it is only a passing whim, yet for her it became a precious moment because she finally felt a bond between them. In that short instant, she believed she could feel her father's affection. Unfortunately, that moment never returned again. Her father grew busy with matters of the state and no longer had the time to care for a daughter born from a concubine. He already had a family to protect. Karina eventually decided that she would perfect her sword skills. She believed that if she becomes stronger than everyone else, then surely her father will one day acknowledge her as part of the family. From that moment, she trained relentlessly. Day after day, she continued practicing without rest. Endless training slowly transformed her into someone frighteningly powerful. One day, she finally defeated her half-brother in front of many witnesses. After that victory, the silent stares around her disappeared. Yet in exchange, she began to live under constant fear and resentment from others. Even her father began to look at her with unease. The faint sympathy he once showed vanished completely. He formally recognized her as a legitimate heir and acknowledged that she was his daughter despite being born from a mistress. Yet the truth became too heavy for him to carry, and for the sake of protecting his household, he eventually chose to turn his back on her. In that moment, Karina understood that all she truly possessed was her sword. From then on, her existence left no room for denial. She vowed to prove her worth with overwhelming strength so that no one can abandon her ever again. That was the only path she believed could earn recognition from her father and her house. Back in the arena, Karina demands to know what Van could possibly understand about such things. Her anger pushes her forward and she rushes toward him again. The swirling blades manage to carve a few small cuts into his body as she attacks. However, her movements now appear slightly slower and more restricted. Van notices the small gaps forming in her attacks. Instead of retreating, he steps forward and closes the distance again. Karina becomes confused by his decision. She wonders why he would dare approach her when everyone else has always fled from the reach of her sword. She cannot understand why a man who possesses no magic at all refuses to step back.